Hey guys, Pete here. This is going to be my Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 4 deep dive, in-depth recap and review. I'm going to go through all the scenes one by one. It will contain spoilers. If you haven't seen Episode 4, then you won't want to watch this video. And like usual, I will put a timestamp link in the description if you want to skip over the scene by scene and go directly to the discussion afterward. So we start off seeing the convoy that the Lannisters have put together filled with loot from taking Highgarden from the Tyrells. As I mentioned in my Top Moments video, Jaime is noticeably shook a bit from what Olenna told him as she was drinking her poison. Bran seems fairly unaffected by the whole situation, and he's mostly just worried about getting his castle. But I think what's more important out of these two things is that we see that Jaime is a little bummed out. Back at the capital, we see that Tycho is very happy with the idea that Cersei's going to pay him off. He also hints that they would like to continue to work with the Lannisters, and once the gold returns, then they would like to, earn some more interest on a new loan. The most important thing we find out here is that she's thinking of hiring sellswords, and not just any sellswords, that is, but the Golden Company. Now, I don't want to go too deeply into what the Golden Company is, because it might not be that important, but they are known by book readers. It's actually kind of exciting, but complicated at the same time, so we'll just say that this is an interesting development, and I'll get into it more if we learn more about these guys being involved. Back at Winterfell, we see what all this hype around the cat's paw blade amounted to, and it's really just Littlefinger trying to use it as a way of bringing Bran over to his side. He's not trying to kill Bran or anything of that kind of sort. He just basically gives him the dagger as a gift, with a little story about how, he loved his mother and he plans to do what she would want even though she's gone, which is to take care of her children. Protect her children, I guess would be the way to describe that. Even though this is a valuable Valyrian steel dagger, Bran isn't interested, even though it was once used in an assassination attempt against him. So we're going to have to say that Littlefinger struck out here. And he also gets a little shock to the system whenever he says the word chaos. Bran says chaos is a ladder, and I think it's safe to say that this shook Littlefinger to the core, and also excited fans, at least this fan. But before we can go any further with that, he's interrupted by Meera entering the room. Just really quickly, the callback here is from Littlefinger's monologue back in Season 3. I'm sure you all remember it, but yeah, that was the point, was that chaos is a ladder, and it's kind of been his mantra since that time. So there was an underlying thing with Bran, with, what is going on with this guy. He seems really kind of dazed in a way, and this comes out even more whenever Meera comes to say goodbye. It's actually really sad. Meera's a great character. She lost her brother in this journey north, and she points that out when she realizes that Bran doesn't really care that she's leaving. When she says, "Is that all you're going to say?" and he adds "thank you" kind of in a weak-ass way, she points out that, hey, Jojen died, Hodor died, your direwolf, Summer, all of us, we gave up so much to get you there. And basically, he just rolls with the idea that he doesn't or isn't capable of caring at this point. She says that he died in that tree when he says he's not really Bran anymore. And it is sad to see her go, but almost exciting at the same time because we know she's going to visit Howland, her father. So we'll leave it at that for now, but it's clear from this scene that Bran really has experienced a transformation in this process of becoming the Three-Eyed Raven. Then we get a really great return that we've all been waiting for, but just as Bran's was, Arya's is a bit bittersweet as well. We see her get to put her new skills to use right away as she has to trick the guards into letting her inside and then run away from them, basically. And we sort of see how being away has affected her. She's at home, but it's not really home anymore. We see her reunite with Sansa in the crypts, And I mentioned this in the other video as well. I think that this went pretty well. When they were kids, they were really opposite, and they really didn't understand each other in a way. We had Sansa who wanted to be a princess, and we had Arya who was the tomboy. But underneath it all, they did love each other. There was a sense of family there, and I think they did connect on that level in those crypts. Expecting them to be like gushy and, some kind of really emotional, heartfelt reunion just wasn't in the works in the beginning. And I think it's a good scene to show just how much has happened to this family when they were spread out all over Westeros. What's more is they've both gone through so much. I mean, we can't really expect that that's all going to come out in one scene. And I was reading Sue the Fury over at Watcher on the Walls recap when I was having lunch earlier, and I thought she did a really good job of pointing out the fact that how can you sum up what's happened? I mean, Arya spent a significant amount of time living with faceless men assassins, and Sansa fed her abusive husband to the hounds, his hounds for that matter, so it's a lot to process. I'm sure some of those things will come out more as things continue. Sansa does mention that Bran is there, so they go up and I wouldn't say things normalize since Bran is full-on weird now, but it takes the pressure off at least, and Bran just throws it out there that he saw Arya at the crossroads. And he says, I thought you would go to King's Landing. So that's a bit of an interesting thing to tuck in the back of our minds. He could see her there, but it kind of confirms that he can't really see the future because he didn't say, I knew you were coming. He said, I thought you might go to King's Landing. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Bran does give Arya the cat's paw blade, which we saw her preseason promotional stuff with it. So now we know how she got it. Sansa points out that, hey, that is not free. Nothing Littlefinger gives is free. And it kind of just points out the fact that Arya is the warrior of the three. You kind of feel bad for Bran for saying it's wasted on a cripple. But, if one of those three is going to have it, it should be her. They end up back inside the castle walls. We get a shot of Brienne and Pod that we saw in the pre-episode photos that HBO put out. It's a nice little exchange there between them. Pod points out that she kept her oath to Catelyn. Both of her daughters are home safely. Brienne tries to play it off because she didn't have a hand in everything that went down. But at the end of the day, it is kind of a nice thing to think about that they did make it back. And what would a scene at Winterfell be these days without a shot of Littlefinger scheming around, checking out the situation, wondering what's going on and how it affects him? Down at Dragonstone, we catch a glimpse of Dany and Missandei having a little conversation about the fact that something may or may not have gone down between her and Grey Worm. This catches Dany's attention, but they don't get to get into it because Jon wants her to check out these caves before he starts mining the Dragonglass. It's actually a pretty big space down there, so we know there's plenty of it. You can kind of see it all over the walls, like veins of it. Of course, that's not why he brought her down there, though. He takes her a little bit deeper and somewhat dramatically reveals these carvings that are down there that came from the Children of the Forest. She's pretty noticeably taken aback by the history involved, which is cool. But the most important thing that he's trying to show her is that they had to work together. There's a depiction of the White Walkers. And then there's another one where we see the men and the Children of the Forest working together. Jon points out that this is what they'll have to do, and of course, we go back to where we were, and she wants him to bend the knee. He's still unwilling to do so, and it comes up a little bit later, but I'm sure I'm not the only person who was really starting to notice that there's real sexual tension between these two. We'll talk about that more later, but this had an intimate spin on it, you know what I'm saying? So it's different than when we saw them talking with their advisors nearby. The other big moment here, though, is that when she's trying to explain to him that aren't his people's lives more important than that pride, the pride that he has to give up to bend the knee, it's almost a word-for-word retelling of what he said to Mance Rayder when Stannis was going to execute Mance for not bending the knee himself. So you can see that Jon didn't understand it back then, but now he kind of does, and it puts him in the same position. Before we can find out too much more about what they're thinking about after this tender moment, Tyrion and Varys break the bad news about Casterly Rock. Daenerys unloads on Tyrion a little bit, and I think she has a pretty good reason to do so. While his plan looked really good on paper, so far it's produced nothing but big losses for her. Of course, it's not all his fault, but that's what a hand does, so nobody said the job was going to be easy, Tyrion. Either way, she wants to head to the Red Keep and just take it out, end things. Tyrion points out that they've talked about this before, and I mentioned in the other video that maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea. A lot of people got upset about that thought and brought up the wildfire and everything, but it is war. There's going to be destruction and people are going to die. But regardless of what we think, she turns to Jon Snow, which is a pretty big moment, and he basically tells her the same thing that everybody else is saying, but puts it in a different perspective. He basically says, you've done something that no one thought was possible. You brought dragons back into the world. People follow you because they think maybe you can do other impossible things like make the world a better place. If you go over there and burn down the Red Keep and destroy King's Landing, you're basically going to show them that you're no different than any of the people that have ruled over them before. That ends there. We go back up to Winterfell. Arya is roaming around looking like a northern young woman, which is pretty cool. She heads over to where Brienne and Pod are sparring, and she wants to get involved. She wants to do a little practicing with Brienne. She kind of gets the better of Brienne at first. But as many people have pointed out, Brienne was probably taking it easy on her at first. We get to see her showing off all the skills she's picked up, both from Syrio Forel and from the Faceless Men. And we see that she is definitely skilled, and all of that stuff that we watched is going to pay off for her in the future. Once Brienne gives her a kick to the chest, we can see that she's no longer taking it easy on her, but Arya still holds her own, and it looks like it's a pretty even match at the end. Sansa and Littlefinger are watching at the same time. I think Sansa is still processing the fact that Arya told her that she has a list of people she wants to kill, and she probably realizes here that, hey, she can actually do that. Littlefinger, on the other hand, is probably thinking something along the lines of, I really liked it here a lot better when I only had to worry about dealing with Sansa. Arya is going to be a problem. We go back for a little bit of comedy relief and a short conversation that Davos has as they're walking down the staircase. He points out that Jon is checking out Daenerys, to which Jon switches gears and says, hey, look, man, we don't have time for any of this. The real problem is the Night King. I've seen him and all this other nonsense. But the takeaway here is definitely that not only is Jon thinking about Daenerys in that way, which we can tell by his terrible attempt at pretending like he's not, it's also a viable way to end this situation of him not being able to bend the knee and her not being able to help him if he doesn't do it. And at this point for me, it became pretty clear that they are going to become lovers, if not more. I know people don't like the idea, but really it's just unavoidable at this point. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, and as I mentioned in the other video, nobody here knows that they're related, and even though the people who are really against this idea don't like it because they're related, it doesn't matter at all in the Targaryen family, so you're just going to have to get over it. And they go and they talk to Missandei, and she kind of reinforces this idea as well. More on the bastard side of things, though, right? She says that marriage doesn't exist, so she doesn't understand what a bastard is. Because that is technically a barrier to them getting married, is that he is a bastard. Theon comes back. Not much happens except for the fact that Jon says he was going to kill him, other than the fact that he saved Sansa's life. I still think there's a possibility that these two will reconcile, like I mentioned in my Theon video, but we don't see much of it here. It's almost an afterthought, and basically what happens is that we find out when Theon asks that Daenerys is gone, and we pretty much know where she went. She didn't go to King's Landing, though. She went with a compromise, which was to attack the army, so we go to the Field of Fire 2.0 instead. We get a little bit of Randall still being a jerk. He wants to flog some people to get things moving. Find out that his son Dickon is actually a little bit more of a human being. We get a little tender moment where he talks about the fact that he had to kill people that he knew, and that's how war actually is. Bran does his Bran stuff, which is getting old, I think. I would have liked to have seen him die here, but we'll get to that in a minute. But then we find out that the battle is about to begin as the Dothraki is rolling over the land that separates them from the Lannister army. Jaime didn't seem to have his scouts out there, I guess, because they're not too far away whenever they realize that they're coming. And it's serious. I mean, this is a serious situation just with the Dothraki coming in. Jaime does think they could hold them off, but when we see Daenerys break through the cloud line, we realize that they have no friggin' possible chance. So this was an episode that was going at a really good clip before that. Pretty much everything was interesting and moving things forward. And then we get into the battle of the season up until this point. I talked about it a lot in my other videos, so I'm not going to break it down other than the broad strokes here. What we see that the Dothraki are as advertised. I mean, they are a serious power on horseback. They basically walk right through the shield walls. And then we see just how effective the dragons really are. Daenerys only has Drogon with her, but she starts cutting through the line herself with the fire. We see a lot of people really dying in horrible ways. Jaime's almost killed, but Dickon comes in to save his life, which may be important later on down the road. Because Jaime only has one hand, he has to try to send Bronn to go shoot the giant ballista, the scorpion, giant crossbow, whatever you want to call it. We see that Tyrion rolls up and he watches things go down. Bronn finally gets a shot in where he can hit Drogon after missing once. It definitely hurts him. He loses control, starts to fall, but he's able to bring it back together in order to burn the weapon. As mentioned, I think Bronn could have died right here, but instead he gets away. I think that would have been a good end for his story, but they had another idea in mind. As the dragon comes down, after being injured, Daenerys gets off his back, tries to pull the bolt out of his shoulder. Tyrion watches in horror as Jaime decides that he's going to charge the queen. He picks up a spear, takes off, but Drogon sees him coming before he gets there and decides to burn him. But out of nowhere, Bronn comes in to knock him off his horse, knock him into the water there, and save his life. Now, there was some speculation after the fact that we see Jaime sinking in the water, wearing full armor, and that maybe he would die. And as I mentioned in my other video, I can't prove that he didn't die because they don't show him in the trailer, but it seems very, very unlikely. And the more interesting question is, what's going to happen when he pops out? And I talked about that in the trailer breakdown, so I won't do it here. The battle was amazing. No one can argue that. If you just skip the scene by scene and are joining the video, welcome. I'm going to talk about some of the big points and some of the other things that come up. So yeah, the Stark family reunion wasn't warm and fuzzy, but it was awesome. They didn't mess this up, in my opinion. Took a while for me to warm up to Bran being a little bit different, but as I mentioned in my other video, I think it's okay. I think that's all right. Sansa, I think, after that fight scene, I think Sansa really kind of has a different kind of respect for Arya, where she's been, what she's done, and I think it shows growth in her that we didn't see whenever they were little. I think that will be reciprocated the other way because let's face it, they both have useful skills that they picked up from their time being away. They're not the same, and of course Bran's are way over in the other end, but hopefully they got that. That's what I took away from it, that everybody realizes that they all have an important role to play going forward. Of course, Bran is the most important on the supernatural plane or the war for the dawn that's coming, but the other two sisters have important roles to play as well. And that's not even to talk about Jon Snow, who's not there at the moment. The Theon-Jon reunion will be put on the back burner beyond what we saw. I'm not really sure what to think about Theon's path going forward. I mentioned this in the other video, and of course he wants to save Yara, but I'm not sure that he'll be able to do that. And while I do think he's on a redemptive arc, it's just not really clear where he comes in to get that redemption. Jon and Daenerys becoming a couple is clearly becoming more of a undeniable reality of this situation. I think that when they were in the cave, that the tension was real. We'd seen little glimpses of it before. And yeah, I just don't see how there's a story that doesn't involve them becoming intimate before this season's out. I like the King's Landing angle with Cersei coming up with a new squad of sellswords just in time to lose the entirety of her forces coming back from Highgarden for the most part. And it really comes down to the fact that this is a stalemate. Each time we thought we knew how things would go in a lopsided direction, and what we find is that even whenever Cersei seemed to take a big lead, it always comes back to no one's going to win this war. The stark reality is that there is no importance in who sits on the Iron Throne. These two sides are going to go back and forth long enough for the Night King to enter the mix and change up the whole frickin' thing. So yeah, that seems to be where things are going now. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about it. I did my trailer breakdown, talked about what we saw there. I'll be doing follow-up videos about some of the points that stand out from that. But yeah, I think that the war for Westeros is looking like a stalemate. I think that Jon bending the knee to Daenerys is looking like a stalemate. I mean, that's not really the right word, but I don't see that moving forward. So I think that the relationship angle is going to come into play. I think the Starks are doing pretty damn good for all that they've been through. Had to love when Bran said chaos is a ladder, and then when Arya said that she learned her new skills from no one when Brienne asked who taught you that. If you haven't seen, the next episode is called Eastwatch, and I think it just confirms what we've already pretty much known. All of this is headed towards the war for the dawn. So yeah. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you know when I upload new videos. I got a pretty good schedule coming out now, so plenty of GOT stuff throughout the rest of the season. Give me a follow over on Twitter and my other social media accounts, and we can interact over there. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys soon.